All right. Well, again, thank you guys for coming today. As promised, we're going to talk about inventorying, the very basics. So my hope is that you'll walk away from this with some really basic pointers and an idea of how to get started. And just kind of as a caveat, we at the VHRP, we focus on paper-based records, as you are aware, but many of these inventory pointers can be applied to object collections as well. So getting started, let's get clear on what an inventory is. So the word inventory is actually both a noun and a verb. So broadly, an inventory is a list of items, but it's also the act of surveying those items to list them. So when we're talking about inventory today, we're referring to it as a list or a record of what material or collections are in your holdings so that you can gain both intellectual control and physical control over them. So intellectual control is understanding what you have, and physical control is knowing where it is so that you can find it. And having an inventory is important because it helps you be more familiar with what you have. It can help you identify materials useful for research. It might help in insurance situations because it provides a record of what you have. It can aid in disaster recovery by helping determine which materials have been damaged. It might help the loss of context around records by grouping related materials together. And it can give you a baseline from which to make decisions on next projects and activities. So for example, you may decide that you need to rebox some of your materials because the boxes are broken or they're not in good shape, but you won't know how many boxes you need until you know how much material and with what dimensions needs to be housed. So this last slide, or that last square, is blank because it represents the fact that you may find your own internal reasons for needing to have an inventory. So before you get started with your inventory, you need to determine the scope and the level of the inventory. So for the scope, you need to decide how much you're going to inventory. Will it just be one shelf or storage area? Will you only inventory one format, such as all of your photographs or all of your diaries? Are you going to inventory all of your holdings? Because that's an option. Once you've decided what and how much you will inventory, you'll need to decide at what level you'll be inventorying. So do you want to inventory at the highest level, like the collection level? So for example, the collection of Allen family papers, the collection of town maps, or do you want to gather information about what's in every box or container? So for example, maybe you inventory the 3 boxes of the Allen family papers, and then you move on to the 5 drawers of town maps. Do you want to get even more detailed and inventory at the folder level? So in that case, you would have information about every folder in each of those boxes of the Allen family papers. Or do you want to be the most detailed and you can gather information about every item that you have in that collection? So this is all fine and good if you have collections or what you think are collections, but what if your materials aren't organized into collections, which is probably going to be a likely scenario. Don't worry if that's the case for you guys. You're in good company. You're definitely not alone. An inventory can help you figure out how you might want to organize your holdings going forward. So here are some suggestions for other ways to systematically inventory your holdings as they are right now. So you can try inventorying by location. So going shelf by shelf and just noting what's on each. For example, so maybe shelf 1 has one box of photographs. It has 3 diaries. It also has 2 boxes of town records, something like that. Or maybe you want to rescope your inventory and just inventory by format. So for example, again, maybe you're just looking at your photographs. Or you can determine some logical groupings among your materials. So maybe those are materials that came in together. You got them at the same time, or they came from the same donor. They're created by the same person, or they're about the same subject matter. So you can use those logical groupings as a jumping off point for your inventory. And then maybe some of those groupings can help you determine an organizational structure moving forward. Do you remember? Inventorying takes time. So the Collections Care and Conservation Alliance, they recommend that you start inventorying at the highest level that will give you meaningful information. So this will give you basic information about what you have at a very high level, and you can always go back later and do more granular inventories as the need arises. So making the choice about scope and level of the inventory, you really need to consider how much time you have to devote to it and how many hands you have to work on it. So really at the end of the day, whatever level makes the most sense for your organization and how you do things and the resources that you have, that's the right level at which to inventory. So once you've decided sort of how much you're doing and where, and you're going to want to map out your storage area before you get started with the inventory. So this is what enables you to assign locations to your materials. So you're going to want to devise a really simple system and then just be consistent with it. So for example, maybe you have 2 storage rooms. You can label them room 1, room 2. Then you could go through those rooms and you could number all of the shelves or the cabinets or the bins, whatever you're using for storage. So a location might be room 1, shelf 3, or it might be room 1, cabinet 2. Once you've mapped out those storage areas, you'll want to affix labels to the shelves or the cabinets so that you know which ones are which. Or alternatively, you could draw a map or a key of the locations, but that way you're just recording and you know what the locations are. So the basic data that should be recorded about each grouping of materials would be the creator, or who's responsible for making or creating, collecting the materials, the record type. So for example, it might be diaries, correspondence, maps, etc. The range of dates covered, the size. So that would be like how much shelf space or cabinet space does it need, and the storage location, which we would have mapped as we talked about in the previous slide. So it's also a good idea to note the material's condition. So are they fragile? Do they need special handling? Any information that you have about how the materials came to you would also be a really good thing to write down in your inventory. So any donations or records transfers, if it was by schedule, something of that nature, just capturing how those things came to you. And you may want just a notes field or a description field for any additional description and information if that's necessary. So another decision that you have to make once you've scoped it and you've figured out the elements of information that you're collecting about your materials, you need to decide how you're going to store your inventory. So do you want to just keep it really simple on a paper, like a paper list or a notebook? Would you like to have it recorded in a simple spreadsheet, which is more searchable? You could also store your inventory in something more sophisticated, like a database, or you could store your inventory in a full collection management system and use your inventory as the starting point for full catalog records. A couple of collection management systems that are being used by historical records repositories in Vermont are Past Perfect and Catalog It. These 2 systems are most often used for item level description. This is important to note. So it really may be better to implement a collection management system down the line after an inventory is completed. So we would recommend storing your inventory at least in a spreadsheet because it's more searchable, it's more customizable than paper. But you'll also need to think about who in your institution needs access to the inventory. So that can help you determine how you might like to store it. So 2 free options or close to free options are Google Sheets and Airtable. They're both really easy to share and they're good options for spreadsheets. So before undergoing the inventory, See what information you already have about your holdings. Do you have previous inventories? That would be amazing. Are there any existing indexes to any parts of what you have? Are there any accession records or donor agreements? Gather any type of information that you have about your collections and your holdings that already exists. Capture that information in the inventory, and it can be a jumping off point for your inventory process. And another important thing to consider is what your inventory information can be used for, because this can help you plan when you're trying to plan out this inventory project. So inventories are really the baseline for other collections activities. So once you know what you have, you can use that information to make decisions and plans for other projects, such as identifying materials that could be used in exhibits or programming, determining priorities for preservation, housing, as I mentioned earlier. If you need to rehouse materials in better boxes or folders, then that inventory information can help you. Doing assessments of the materials for research value or some other sort of value, identifying good candidates for digitization, and identifying material that might be out of scope for your organization, and that should be deaccessioned. So these are just a few ideas for how your inventory could be used for other projects. Quick note on deaccessioning. You can only determine if material is out of scope for your organization if you have a collecting policy. So it's a statement that states what it is that you collect. So if you don't have a collecting policy that determines that scope, you should make one. This is something that can be developed as you inventory, because as you inventory, you may start to see clear patterns in what your organization has, or on the other hand, you may see significant gaps in what you have that you might like to collect in the future. So when you're planning for your inventory project, think about how your inventory information could be used and reused in the future. How might you be able to build on the inventory work that you've done? So we've done all this planning work and all this thinking, but once you've done that planning, it's just time to get started. And getting started is as easy, I hope, as easy as it sounds. I hope it sounds easy. Just do it. Just start. Just choose a location to begin, and that's going to be based on the scope of your inventory. Then you just move through the locations methodically, shelf by shelf or cabinet by cabinet, box by box. Capture whatever information is apparent to you, but don't get caught in the weeds. Just record the basics and move on. And it's okay if this inventory process takes time. Just remember that every little bit helps. Progress is progress, and it's worth doing the work. And if you feel overwhelmed, it may be that you've started trying to capture information at too granular of a level. So in that case, maybe take a step back, try starting again at a higher level. If you're trying to do item level inventory, maybe you're just going to take a step back and be like, all right, let's just do box by box. And that might feel more manageable to you. You can always reach out to Rachel and I at the VHRP for help. So as promised, this was a pretty quick introduction. It's all I have for you about inventorying basics. So I hope that this was a really useful basic overview and that you're inspired to start your own inventory projects. I also want to note that we're hoping to send out a brief survey in the coming months to gauge where cultural heritage institutions are in their inventorying efforts. We'd really like to be able to help people, support people as they're going through this process. And so having some information from a survey will help the VHRP better tailor our services to meet the needs out there.